All right, so your first step when you are setting up your long division is to put the 1024 underneath, and then you ask yourself, does 3 go into 1? If it doesn't, you're going to go into 10. So 3 goes into 10. What do you put here? 9. How did you get it? 3 times 3, okay? And then what do you do with the 9 and the 10? Subtract. Okay, so up here. Okay, then what you do is if this does not go into the number, you drop the next one down. And then 3 goes into 12 4 times.
Oh, 12.
Okay, and then so then you bring this down. Okay, so 3 goes into 4 times 3 is 12. Yep. And then 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so then you have a remainder of 1. Okay, so when you are writing your final answer, you're going to take the quotient and then you can write it as a remainder. Okay, some of you may have done the decimals, like if you do the 0.0 and then your process keeps continuing, that's fine too. But you always want to find out what goes into your value, and then you're going to subtract once you multiply. So we're going to use that same thing today when we are doing long division with polynomials. So we're not going to do long division with numbers. We're going to be doing that with polynomials. The first thing we're going to talk about is dividing with monomials. So monomials are one term. So the 3a squared is a monomial. The 3x squared, y squared to the negative 1, okay, that is a monomial. And sometimes it's going to be written like this, where you're dividing. Other times it's going to be written to the power of negative 1. And we're going to remind ourselves what that means as well. So when you're dividing by a monomial, you can divide each term by 3a squared. Okay, and if you want, you can write it out like this. You are dividing each term by 3a squared. Okay, so you're going to do negative 12 by 3 to get negative 4. When you are dividing variables, do you remember what we do with the exponents? Yes. So when dividing variables, you have to subtract the exponents. Okay, so it's when you're dividing variables with the same base. You're going to subtract your exponents. So 5 minus 2 is 3. And then can you guys do the next 2 and write down what that is? Okay, so divide your number by your number, your variable by your variable. Okay, so then you should have negative 4a cubed, and then 30 divided by 3 is 10. 4 minus 2 is 2. 21 divided by 3 is 7. 3 minus 2 is 1. So this is going to be your final answer. Okay, now when you have something to the negative 1 power, remember that this means 1 over 3x squared y squared. And it's all to the power of positive 1. So we've talked about negative exponents before. To make them positive, you put them underneath. So what this means is if you are multiplying this by 1 over this value, that is the same thing as dividing everything by 3x squared y squared. Okay, so if it's a multiplied by a value to the power of negative 1, it means you're multiplying it by this fraction, so we're going to divide. Again, you are dividing every term by this, so you could write it out 3 times like we did here, Most of you are not going to need that in order to simplify. So will you go ahead and find your answer for part B? So again, you divide the number by the number, do the variable by the variable. Okay, so once you do 9 divided by 3, you get 3. If this is x to the 9th and this is x squared, you just have to do 9 minus 2. Here you do 5 minus 2. Okay, and then 21 divided by 3 is 7. 4 minus 2 is 2. 4 minus 2 is 2. And then here you have a negative divided by a positive. So this is going to be negative 4. X cubed divided by x squared is x, and then y squared divided by itself is y to the 0. Anything to the 0 power, do you guys remember what that is? 1. So 4x times 1 is just 4x. You can also think of it as, oh, those are just going to cancel out. So your final answer is 3x to the 7th, y cubed plus 7x squared, y squared minus 4x. Okay, so you can do this when you're dividing by monomials, but we're also going to learn how to divide when you have a binomial. Next year, you'll even divide by some trinomials. So when you're doing long division, we're going to be using some certain terms. So we're going to make sure we understand which each one represents. So when you're doing long division, what's underneath, do you guys remember? Did I say it today? Just remember what this is called underneath. This is the dividend, yep. And then the divisor is on the outside, and those are going to be given to you in the problem, okay? Then you are going to find what the quotient is. That's going to be what you have on top, okay? And then when you have a remainder, like you'll do all your math here, and then you'll have a remainder at the end, and then we're going to be writing our answers in a specific form. Okay, so your solution form is always going to be the quotient. So whatever you get on the top is the quotient. And then you're going to add the remainder, and that is going to be over the divisor. Okay, so the quotient plus the remainder over your divisor. And if you look back at our example that we did for our warm-up, that is how we wrote that. Okay, so our remainder was 1, and we wrote it as 1 over 3. Okay, this time our divisor is going to be a polynomial. So it seemed like some of us weren't very comfortable with the long division, so I'm going to go over this step by step. So whatever you're dividing by, this is your divisor. So the x minus 3 is going to go outside. This is going to be your dividend. That's going to go inside. So x squared minus x minus 6. So remember when we did the long division, the first thing that we looked at in this whole number, we didn't find what 3 went into in the whole number. We just looked at this first part here, right? We said how many times does 3 go into 10? And then we multiplied and we subtracted. That is exactly how we start this problem. You are going to look at the x squared and the x, okay? And there's 2 ways that you can think about this. So when you're doing this with numbers, you really do think about like the 3 times 3 is the 9. And so a lot of times the books teach it that way. So you can ask yourself, what do you multiply by x And I wrote this here to help you if you get stuck. So ask yourself, what can we multiply by x that will give us x squared? Okay, yep, so what can we multiply by x that will give us x squared? It is x. So just like we did before, remember how we multiplied the 3 by the 3 to get the 9? Okay, this time we have to multiply the x by the x. Okay, and this was our answer. So our answer is x, so we put that on top. Okay, so now we have to distribute that value to all terms of the divisor. So x times x is going to give you x squared. What's different about this is you have to distribute. Okay, so if you're distributing, you're going to multiply x times negative 3, which is negative 3x. You're going to put that here. Okay, and this is going to take a couple times through to really understand, so just try to bear with me for these. So x times x is x squared, x times negative 3 is negative 3x. Now, looking back at what we did up here, the 10 and the 9, we ended up subtracting them, right? So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to subtract, but you have two terms. So when you're subtracting, you have to distribute the negative. So this is going to become a minus. This is going to become a plus. And the way that we show that we've completed this step is we just circle those new signs. Okay, so that lets us know that you have distributed the negative there. And if you did this correctly, once you distribute the negative, these should cancel out. So you should get x squared minus x squared is nothing, and then negative x plus 3 is going to be 2x. Okay, and then once you do that, you just drop that negative 6 right down. Just like when we did this, we drop down the 2. Just like when we did our warm-up, we drop that down. Okay, and then guess what? The process starts all over again, right? So now we're going to say, okay, how many times does x go into 2x? So what times x is going to be equal to 2x? Again, you're always looking at these first two. So what times x is 2x? Plus 2. And then once you put that on the top, now you distribute. So 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Okay, and then we're going to distribute the negative. So this becomes a minus, this becomes a plus. So when this happens, you get 0. Your remainder is 0. And if your remainder is 0, your solution is just your quotient. So your solution would just be x plus 2. Okay, so how can we check to see if our solution is correct? Do you guys have an idea? So multiply what by the divisor? Okay, so we're going to multiply your quotient, yeah, which is your solution. So multiply the quotient by your divisor. So we're going to do that for this one. Okay, and it should be equal to the dividend. It should be equal to that number underneath. Okay, so this one is a really quick one to check. So if you multiply x plus 2 times x minus 3, all you have to do is what? Oil! Yay! Okay, so x times x is going to be x squared. Inside you have 2x, outside you have negative 3x. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Is that your dividend? Yay, then we did it right. Okay, checking is not something that you have to do. I just want to show you how you could verify on a test or a quiz how you got it right, okay, if you were unsure. But you do not have to check. I just want to show you how you could check that. I'm not requiring you to do that to get all your points, okay? All right, now for part B, this is another one where they're giving this to you in the form of an exponent that's -1. This is still going to be your divisor because remember, it means 1 over x plus 7. Okay, so you are dividing those. So let's set up our long division. And then I would like you to try the first step and then we'll verify that. Okay, so the first thing you should be asking yourself is, what can you multiply by x to get to -6x squared? Okay, another way you can do this is you can just divide. If you do -6x squared divided by x, what would you be left with? And so you can put that on the top. And now I want you to distribute, okay? So you're going to distribute both. All right, so then you should have -6x squared. -6 times 7 is -42. Okay, and then once you have that, you're going to distribute the negative. So this becomes a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. These should always make 0, okay, once you distribute the negative. 5 plus 42 is 47. You're going to drop down the -10. Okay, and then you are going to repeat the process. So you know that you are done when your remainder has a lesser degree than your divisor. Okay, and we'll write that down in a second as a reminder. So if you have 47x, okay, you can just divide. 47x divided by x is 47. So we're going to put plus 47 here. Okay, and then when you're multiplying, this will be a no calculator section, so let's practice that. If you're doing 47 times 7, I think the easiest thing to do is 40 times 7, which is 280, and then 7 times 7, which is 49. 12, carry the 1. Okay, so then you have a positive 329. Okay, and then so this is a minus, this is a minus. You distribute that negative, and then once you do that, -10 minus -329 is -339. Okay, now this is your remainder. This is how you know when to stop. The remainder will always have a lesser degree than the divisor. Okay, it's all about the degree. So the remainder is always going to have a lesser degree than the divisor. So when you guys were doing your textbook problems, or online textbook problems for your last test, one of the polynomials they gave you was a number. So do you guys remember what the degree is of just a constant term, a number term? No? 0, yep. And then the x plus 7, the degree of your divisor is 1 because it's x to the first. So any number is not going to have an x value, and that's why your degree is 0. Any x value that doesn't have an exponent has the degree of 1. So because this degree is less than that of the divisor, we know that we are done. And then your solution is the quotient. And then normally we do plus, but see how your remainder is a negative? So we're going to do minus 339 over your divisor. So your divisor is x plus 7. Now, if you put a plus here and a minus there, that's fine. You could do plus and negative. Okay. All right. Now, for the next, yep.
Why is it that the exponent? Why is it the degree of 0? Why is it that it has a degree of 0?
So because there's no variable, your degree is going to be 0. If you had a variable, you would have the degree of 1. It is a little confusing because, like, usually your degrees are your exponents, but for a constant, you don't have one, so that's why your degree is 0. But it's not an exponent. Yep.
Variable times what if you have variable with the degree of 0, what would that just be equivalent to what it is?
Yeah, because if you had, like, let's say you had x to the 0 power, let's say you had 5x to the 0 power. Do you guys remember what anything to the 0 power is? 1, yep, so 5 times 1 is just 5. So this would be equivalent to just your constant term. Mm-hmm.
Why does say an exponent of 0
That's just the rule. Because if you're multiplying, it has to be equal to something that doesn't change the value. And if an exponent of 0 was equal to 0, that would make this whole thing 0, and that would change it.
Is there a reason why it gives us the test that way?
It's just because it is a multiplicative value that doesn't change it. But there's no like proof I can give you of that besides this. Okay. All right, and then if you are missing a term, and by that it means there's a gap in the terms, you need to write it with a coefficient of 0. Now, sometimes this is going to make a difference, and other times it's not. So we're going to see both cases. One where it makes a difference, and one where it really doesn't. I always recommend that you do it, and that's because I don't want you to accidentally add terms that are not like terms. So we're going to use it as a placeholder. We'll also learn a new type of division tomorrow where you have to put the zeros in. So this is kind of a precursor to that. So if we look at part C, it says 3x cubed plus 9x squared minus 14. What term is missing? The x term, yep, just the x to the first. So you're missing the x term. So like I said, anytime you're missing something, I would always put it in. You're going to see in this example, it is not going to make a difference here. And then we're going to see one example where it does make a difference. Okay, so we're going to look at both cases. All right, so we're going to start this the same as the other one, where what you're going to do is you're going to look at that 3x cubed and that x, and you can either divide or ask yourself what times x is going to give you 3x cubed. Yeah, what is it? 3x squared. So if you multiply 3x squared times x, you'll get 3x cubed. And then 3x squared times 3 is plus 9x squared. Now this is why it doesn't matter. This is a special case. This doesn't happen all the time, where when you minus and you minus, what happens here? Right? It's just you have 0x squared plus 0x minus 14. So isn't that just the same thing as negative 14? Yeah. So in this case, because this degree is less than the degree of this, because the degree of negative 14 is 0, the degree of x plus 3 is 1, okay? This is a very short example. Your solution is just 3x squared minus your remainder 14, and again it's minus because it's negative, over x plus 3. Okay, so that's an example where the 0x really didn't affect what we were doing. We're going to see an example now where we want to make sure we have that placeholder in. And also, when you're writing this out, take a look at your exponents. Make sure that they are in the correct form, because this is not written in standard form. What should go first in standard form? Yep, so the third power. So we're going to rewrite this in standard form underneath. So the 2y cubed should go first. After y cubed should go y squared. Do we have a y squared? Yes. Do we have a y? Nope. So we're going to put 0y, and then we have the 25. Okay, so we're going to write it in standard form, and then if there are any gaps, we want to make sure we have that placeholder. Okay, and then y minus 3 is your divisor. Okay, so I want you guys to try to do your first step here. Okay, so then when you do 2y cubed divided by y, you should have got 2y squared. So when you distribute, you have 2y cubed minus 6y squared. Okay, from there, we're going to distribute that negative. So minus, and then minus a negative becomes plus. Okay, so then here we have negative 1 plus 6, so we'll have 5y squared. And then we're going to drop down the 0y and the 25. Right? Because we have the 5y squared, so we're going to drop both those down. And then we're going to do this again. So now I want you guys to do the second step. There's 6y. So first, one of the ones. Right now. So 6 minus 1. It's with missing.
Oh.
Two things that all find different. One's part different. Then it has to
Yeah, Cleo, why not?
All right, how do we do with this? What do we put up top?
5y.
Good. So now when we do that, we have 5y squared, and this is why you want the 0y. So you should have negative 15y. If you didn't have the 0y, it would be on top of the 25. And sometimes people try to add them because they're in the same line, but they're not the same terms, and you can only add like terms together. So now we're going to distribute that negative. So you'll have 15y plus 25. The degrees right now are both the same. See how they're both 1? Both of the degrees are 1, so we can keep going. So this should be plus 15, because we'll get 15y minus 45. Change your sign, change your sign. 25 and 45 is... I like borrow things. So like this would be 50, 15, 20, 70. That's your remainder. So now your degree is 0, which is less than that. So you're going to have 2y squared plus 5y plus 15 plus your remainder is 70. That always goes over your divider. So we finally had a positive remainder, so we can use our plus. And then it's going to be over y minus 3. Right, now we can still check our solutions even if there's a remainder. It's going to be very similar to what we had before. You're still going to multiply the quotient and the divisor. Then you're going to add the remainder. I'm just going to put r. Is that okay? Add remainder. Do you want to write it out or no? Say it again. It was, and then you got to distribute the negative. It was minus 45, and then when you distribute the negative, this becomes minus, and this becomes plus. Yep. So you'll change your sign. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys just do this first part first. So you're going to multiply your quotient and your divider. So the quotient is the 2y squared plus 5y plus 15. So this is exactly what we did in our earlier section. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll add the remainder together. And just remember, when you're multiplying anything by y, the only thing that changes is that exponent. Or if there is no y, you're going to put the y there. Anything times negative 3, you're just going to multiply the numbers. So you have negative 6y squared, negative 15y, negative 45. So negative 15 and positive 15 are going to cancel, and this is what you have. Now you have to just add that remainder. So your remainder was, bless you, 70. So if you add 70, you get 2y cubed minus y squared. What's 70 minus 45? Close. Good. And then see how this is your dividend? Okay, so you can always check to make sure that you did that correctly. All right, I'm going to write up your homework, and then I'm also going to give you one more direction, so stay quiet for me so I can make sure we all understand this. Okay, it's about your previous homework.